Okay, colleagues, wish to advise you that the committee meeting is in public session and will be recorded and broadcast through our Parliament buildings and online. I have received apologies from Sinead McLaughlin, otherwise we have a full attendance. Does members have any interests they wish to declare at this stage? David?
Just on the students again,
Student
I have
loans,
a
yep.
daughter who's a student.
Yep. Audrey?
Yeah, I've undertaken a productivity scale-up course as part of my role as Sinn Féin spokesperson for further and higher education.
And Jonathan?
Hold on, you're on. Can you unmute yourself, Jonathan? Oh, this isn't good.
No. We just need to message broadcast.
Yep, we'll just do that.
It's in now.
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yeah.
Do you know, Jonathan?
Yes, just to declare interest as someone with student loan. I always do that anyway.
No problem at all.
All right, Chair, I should have declared that as well.
And here we
Yeah,
go.
I have a student loan too.
Okay, draft minutes, colleagues. You will see at page 8 of the pack. There's a copy of the draft minutes. Peter, you just want to make a comment on those?
Did you miss Chair's business, Chair?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Chair's business, apologies. Item 3, just to thank members yesterday who were able to make it along to the informal meeting with Hospitality Ulster, the Belfast Nights Hour and TransLink. I think that was a useful discussion. Our members' content, we reflect our deliberations to both the Minister for the Economy and the Minister for Infrastructure. And the only other issue then, members, that Peter has flagged is that the committee may wish to write to the department in relation to SIB's ongoing review of further education student support. Are members content with that also?
Members, can you assent? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Just when I'm here, just Hansard had a word with me last week. Basically, so when the chair says, "Is that agreed?" If members would please answer, because otherwise you haven't assented. So that was agreed then.
Members are
Yes.
agreed. Perfect.
Thank you. Chair.
Draft minutes then, page 8 of our pack. Peter.
So members, if you actually look at page 11, I've just made an error. I just want to correct that. It's in terms of the key issues discussed. There's a bit where it says all the things that we discussed, and then there's a line where I've written the reported absence of a business need. And I just want to change that to what the department actually said was the reported absence of a public interest business case to address tariffs during the 2019-2024 period, if members are content with that amendment.
Members content to approve the minutes as a true and accurate reflection of
Yes.
that amendment? Yes. Okay, thank you. Item 5 then, members, matters arising. Or is there anything members wish to raise from the minutes that aren't on the agenda today? No, if not, then we will move to item 6, productivity in Northern Ireland. At this stage, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. David Jordan, who's one of Minister Murphy's critical friends in relation to the development of his economic vision. Members will be aware that the Minister outlined 4 key priorities that he wishes to pursue during his time as Minister, and Dr. Jordan is providing expert advice in relation to the issue of productivity. So with that, Dr. Jordan, you're very welcome, and I'm going to hand over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation today to speak to you and present some of our evidence around productivity. As a brief background to myself, I'm a lecturer in economics at Queen's Business School at Queen's University. I'm also a research associate at the Productivity Institute. And as part of that, I work on the Northern Ireland Productivity Forum with my colleagues, Professor John Turner and Ruth Donaldson. And I'll start off by giving just a very brief background to the Productivity Forum and what we've been doing. And now I'll move on to a brief overview of the evidence I submitted just around productivity. So the Northern Ireland Productivity Forum is part of the wider Productivity Institute, which is based at the University of Manchester. It's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. And its main aim is to look at why the UK has this problem of low productivity. And as part of that, it has 8 regional forums across the UK. And one of those for Northern Ireland is based at Queen's Business School. So since the second half of 2020, we've been looking at why Northern Ireland has this problem of low productivity, what are some of the reasons behind that, and we're also thinking about what the policy solution to that might be. And following on from that, I was then in February appointed as an independent expert advisor to the department by the Minister on productivity, and since then I've been giving sort of advice to the department as they seek to address that issue. So then giving sort of an overview of productivity in Northern Ireland and some of the work we've been carrying out. I should start by sort of outlining obviously why productivity is important. Fundamentally, productivity is what drives our living standards over time. So it's an increase in productivity growth is what increases our living standards, and that's what allows us to pay higher wages for businesses to be more competitive. Also means businesses are more resilient when they have higher productivity. So in economic downturns, higher productivity businesses are the ones that survive best. And it can also lead to more tax revenue available for public services, which is obviously very relevant currently for our situation here in Northern Ireland. In terms of how productivity is measured, generally as economists we tend to focus on a sort of economy-wide measure of productivity, so gross value added, normally measured per hour worked or per job in the economy. And you'll see from the evidence I do sort of mention there are some differences sometimes depending on how we measure this as to what the picture looks like, particularly across Northern Ireland. And this is very much labour productivity, so we're thinking here of productivity in terms of what people produce whenever they work. There is another measure of productivity referred to as total factor productivity or multi-factor productivity, and that takes into account the capital assets or the machinery buildings we have in the economy, but we currently don't have measures of those for Northern Ireland, so we can't measure total or multi-factor productivity. So we rely on this measure of labour productivity to understand Northern Ireland's performance. In terms of Northern Ireland's performance, it probably doesn't come as a surprise that we underperform, and we have this issue of low productivity. So the most recent data from the ONS shows that we have roughly a 13% gap to the UK level, UK average, when measured per hour worked. If you measure that per job, it's around 11%, but roughly it's a bit over 10%. This is a little bit different from the picture we've seen over the past 10 to 20 years. So more over that period of time, the productivity gap has tended to be 15 to 20%, so a bit wider. And this gap has really narrowed during the period around COVID. So it's important to note that the most recent data we have is for 2 years ago, as it's produced by the ONS with this lag. So we can only see what the picture is in 2022. And we did see that Northern Ireland closed the gap slightly in 2021 and 2022, but we don't yet know the full picture because of the COVID effect. Also, it's important to mention that the productivity gap is not spread evenly across Northern Ireland. So there are areas of Northern Ireland that perform quite well. There are areas that lag quite far behind. Our measure of that has been affected by the COVID pandemic, and it's changed the sort of relative ranking of some of the areas within Northern Ireland. So traditionally, we would have seen Belfast being a productivity leader, and if we measure productivity per job, it still is the best performing local council area in Northern Ireland. However, if we measure per hour worked, it's not the best performing, it's actually in about the middle, and we see somewhere like Mid-Ulster performing much better. And that also affects the local council areas that tend to be at the bottom of the distribution. So Derry City and Strabane tended to be the underperformer, but in the most recent data for per hour worked, it actually isn't at the bottom of the ranking. And it's also then important to mention how Northern Ireland performs compared to our closest neighbour, the Republic of Ireland. We did some work last year for the Northern Ireland Productivity Dashboard, and we looked at the productivity gap between the UK and the Republic of Ireland, and then that gives us an idea what the gap is for Northern Ireland as well. And we measured the gap as the Republic of Ireland being 8% above the UK level. And that works out at roughly Northern Ireland having a 17% gap below the Republic of Ireland. That is based on using modified gross national income, because as we know, there are issues around measuring GDP for the Republic of Ireland. Other research has placed the gap at a higher level. So for example, the Economic and Social Research Institute, whenever they produced a report a couple of years ago, measured the gap as Northern Ireland, or the Republic of Ireland being 40% higher than productivity levels in Northern Ireland. So there is a variation in this estimate, but we do know Northern Ireland lags behind, albeit it's important to mention that Productivity is performance in the Republic of Ireland is not evenly spread geographically. Dublin is a leader, followed by Cork. And in previous work about a decade ago by Paul McFlynn of the Nevin Institute, Belfast actually came in third. So we have to remember there is sort of geographic variation in this as well. In terms of some of our work that we've done at the forum, our first piece of research was trying to look at the explanations for low productivity and what other researchers has said, and trying to understand what the main reasons are. And we were able to identify 7 key areas that explain why Northern Ireland has lower productivity consistently over the past 100 years. The first is around economic structure. For Northern Ireland, it traditionally had quite a high concentration in shipbuilding, textiles and linen. And if you go back to the 1920s and 1930s, that was one of the key explanations for low productivity in Northern Ireland. However, now structure is less important. And if we give Northern Ireland the same economic structure as the rest of the UK, we'd only close around half the productivity gap. And that means that there are failings within sectors that explain why Northern Ireland has low productivity. The second main area is around peripherality. So traditionally this is thought of as Northern Ireland being geographically peripheral, in other words, being distant from economic markets and where it might sell its goods. Again, this has become less important over time, particularly because of the move towards services. And now it's more around what's termed soft peripherality. So this is distance from networks to do with knowledge, new technology and innovation. So adopting new technologies in businesses here. And that sort of leads on to our third explanation around capital and investment. So in the past, there was a big focus on policymakers here over the past 100 years on levels of capital. So traditionally, Northern Ireland had low levels of machinery and businesses. It was very reliant on labour inputs. That disappeared by around the 1980s, 1990s. But this issue around investment, particularly in research and development, has remained a key area where Northern Ireland appears to underinvest. And it actually does invest slightly more from our evidence than some of the other low productivity regions in the UK. However, we think this might be to do with the investment being concentrated in a small number of large firms. So it's not evenly spread across Northern Ireland's businesses. Our fourth reason is around human capital. So there are 2 main areas here. One is around the attainment gap. Northern Ireland has the worst performance in terms of the proportion of individuals in the workforce with low or no skills. So we consistently underperform in this. And although we've improved over time, other regions have also improved. So we still lag behind on this. We also still suffer in some ways from a brain drain. In the past, this was much more severe than it is now, but we're still feeling the effects of that past movement of individuals away from Northern Ireland not returning whenever they have university education. So it still is an issue. And there is an issue as well around whether or not, to do with skills, our workforce has the right skills, because we can talk about qualifications as an output, but we have to think about what the skills are that people are using in their jobs. Infrastructure is our fifth reason. This is much more difficult to measure. However, there is evidence that Northern Ireland has underinvested over time in infrastructure, and therefore that can act as a barrier to productivity growth. Our sixth reason is public policy. There are some failings here that we've been able to identify. Firstly, problems in the past have been misdiagnosed. So I mentioned earlier about the focus on capital investment. That was very much the key thing that policymakers and policy focused on trying to address, but that maybe led to less of an emphasis around skills, particularly within businesses. Second area within that is around policy silos. So policy here tends not to be joined up. A lot of these issues are very complex. They actually go across different departments, and therefore it requires some joined up thinking and policy interventions. And also, productivity has often been an aspiration for policy here. However, it has rarely been used to measure the outcomes of interventions. And if you don't therefore take into account what the performance has been, evaluated the effect of policies, then it just remains this aspiration for policy. Seventh area is around institutions and governance. This is quite difficult to measure, but it is potentially the most important area underlying the previous 6 reasons for low productivity. Some aspects of this are to do with political stability, long-term policy making and thinking. We know that because Stormont has not always been up and running for the past 25 years, the policy here has tended to operate on a shorter time scale. So based on this work, we've been looking at some of the specific areas to do with productivity in Northern Ireland. We have produced the Northern Ireland Productivity Dashboard the past 2 years. We'll be publishing that again this year. And that's to try and look at the different areas that feed into low productivity here, recognising that it is a complex issue and there are different drivers of productivity growth. And we've also looked at management practices in Northern Ireland. We conducted a piece of research in 2022-2023, and that looked at the management practices of businesses here in Northern Ireland. Because at that time, the survey by the ONS, the Management Expectation Survey, did not include Northern Ireland within it. We are very pleased that now in the most recent survey that happened in 2023 by ONS, Northern Ireland is now included. And we see from that Northern Ireland does underperform in terms of management practices. And from our own work, we've seen that smaller firms that are orientated towards the domestic economy, tend to have poor management practices. And this has knock-on effects for digitalisation and exporting as well. And to sort of conclude on what we've been looking at, I mentioned in my written evidence about maybe what policy might think about doing to solve these issues. And I have 3 sort of broad aspects that go beyond individual policies. So the first is making productivity a priority for policy, and that's why it's very welcome that the Department for Economy has included it as one of its 4 key pillars, and also that the Programme for Government has included productivity as an issue that needs to be addressed. I would just emphasise that for the Programme of Government particularly, it needs or should hopefully include some kind of target for productivity, ideally. Otherwise, we're going to go back to this issue of productivity being an aspiration, but we don't actually measure or target a particular level. Second area is around coordination of policies. So in the past, policies have tended to operate in silos here. And if we look at our own research in terms of management practices, as an example, we find that firms that have better management practices also have greater digitalisation of their business. So if you want to think about improving the use of technology in business here, it's not simply about providing businesses with incentives for that. You may also need to support their management practices as well. And the third area is about making productivity a long-term priority. So I mentioned that we tend to have short-term policy thinking in Northern Ireland for a variety of reasons, but productivity and low productivity in Northern Ireland is a very deep-seated problem. It has multiple causes. It's not a straightforward thing to address, which means there will be no single policy solution that will improve productivity by itself. But that means we need to address it over a period of time, and that goes beyond a single executive term. So that's an overview of what we've been working on at the forum and my evidence, and very happy to take questions on any of that.
Thank you very much, sir. Gary?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Dr. Jordan, obviously, for the presentation. Very interesting. 2 questions for me. The first one just is around the data piece. Obviously, you've done a lot of work in terms of looking at the explanations for poor productivity. One of the things that you touch on is the fact that at one point Northern Ireland had greater availability of data in comparison with the rest of the UK, but you say that the lack of disaggregated sectoral and firm level data restricts our ability to understand obviously the nature of it. So how best can we get that data, and why are we now falling behind in terms of access to it in comparison with the rest of the UK?
So on the data side, the data that's produced, or the numbers that are produced for productivity for Northern Ireland, are published by ONS, by the Office for National Statistics. So they produce the numbers for Northern Ireland as their wider publication for the regions and nations of the UK. This means that we're sort of reliant on the ONS. So with the data that's collected to produce the productivity statistics, it's collected by NISRA, so NISRA has that responsibility. but it passes that underlying survey data to ONS to produce the measures for productivity for Northern Ireland. So that's partly why there's a lag, and obviously some of the surveys have to be processed. I think there's an issue potentially there about the resourcing of NISRA, as well as the time it takes for ONS to publish. So I think an important aspect here is around making sure NISRA is well resourced, because whenever we're trying to understand what the productivity problem is, at times we're trying to infer what it is based on the data we have, but that data does have limitations. So to give an example of that, it wasn't until about 2 years ago that we actually had productivity measured per hour at a local council level for Northern Ireland, because that wasn't available. So I think it is important. It's a complex issue in itself about providing that data, because it is about this relationship between NISRA and ONS. I think NISRA does a very good job, but I think there's opportunities to improve the coverage of what we have.
Okay, so and primarily that's resourcing issues as opposed to anything else?
Partly resourcing, partly because it's survey data, it takes time to process, but there is potential that we could have other indicators more quickly produced if the resource was there.
And your report also touches on, obviously, we had the pandemic, we have a change in how people do things. There's been an acceleration of, for example, there are 3 members who are remotely joining this meeting. I wouldn't suggest that they're any less productive than we are. They are joining remotely because obviously actually they could be more productive because one of them's from the northwest. He doesn't have to travel an hour and a half to get here and an hour and a half back. So that change in how we're doing things obviously should be reflected in how we try and increase productivity. Has there been any thought in terms of looking into, for example, other countries have moved towards a 4-day week, for example. Some of the feedback in that respect has been very positive, an increase in productivity for the business and obviously better outcomes and healthier outcomes for the individual as well. So have there been any thoughts in terms of given some evidence in that frame of mind?
Yes, so for Northern Ireland, we probably don't have very specific evidence on this, but I'll sort of deal with the 2 aspects of this, the remote part and then the 4-day week part. So in terms of remote working, there is an opportunity for Northern Ireland here particularly across Northern Ireland if we think about the regional imbalances in productivity, that you could have people who are able to work outside of Belfast in service industries that wouldn't traditionally have made that possible, because we now have a greater extent of remote work. So there's an opportunity there. A potential issue is around the type of service industries maybe Northern Ireland is more concentrated in. Do those offer an opportunity to have a greater extent of remote working? That's an open question. I'm not sure fully what the conclusion would be on that. So I think there's an opportunity there, particularly as we try and improve Northern Ireland's performance in terms of globally integrated service industries. I think it's a potential attraction for bringing investment to Northern Ireland that remote work has changed how we work here. And that does link therefore to the 4-day week. And I think with that aspect, worker well-being is incredibly important for productivity. I think it's sometimes forgotten that sometimes the perception is productivity is about working very hard and getting as much done as possible. But that can only take you so far. If you want to see sustainable productivity improvements for a business and for a wider workforce, the well-being and health aspect is very important. And there is definitely international evidence that suggests the 4-day week is an important contributor to improving that. It won't necessarily be suitable for all areas, so I don't think it's going to be a blanket thing that everywhere or every industry or every business could introduce. But the awareness that it can help is important for employers, so that they can try and find what works best for their business.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Patrick?
Great, thank you. And I was reading the stats there. It's 8% more productive if you're working from home. I'm working from the office, but Gary's been about 80% more productive because he's stolen my 2 questions there. He's already asked them. But just want to build on that a wee bit as well. The 4-day working week is something I had taken forward as a private member's bill. So I'd be keen maybe to get a bit more data, if that's okay, if you could send anything on to the committee on that, just really to, I suppose, look, I don't want to go over it again today. But the data piece as well. The measurements that you're using, I know you've talked about. Obviously, with any data, you're going to have setbacks. You're going to have a data deficit in certain areas. But I'm just wondering, as an overall piece, until we have that data, can you actually have targeted interventions that the department can put forward? Because I'm conscious that without that data, we're kind of, we're moving forward without the necessary data or without the stats. So is that, do you see that as a necessary sort of precursor to doing anything substantive on productivity, or do you think that there are things that we can do in the interim until that data is collected in a substantive way?
Yes. On the remote work, yes, very happy to share any of the international evidence on that. In terms of measurement, I think this is a very good point in terms of trying to understand what we can do with policy and how we can target it given the potential limitations we have. So this is partly the motivation for why we produced the productivity dashboard, was to try and look at what we can measure for Northern Ireland, particularly to try and benchmark Northern Ireland, because it's okay to say Northern Ireland's improving, but if we're not improving as well as somewhere else that might be quite similar, well, actually maybe we're not doing as good a job as we thought we were. And therefore, that's why we try and included these drivers of productivity in the dashboard to see how Northern Ireland performed. With those, there is quite a range of reporting lags. So some data can be quite recent. So particularly to do with the labour market, we have quite up-to-date data around skills, qualifications. However, if we look at other areas, we tend to see much more of a lag. So for example, measuring innovation levels in businesses, that tends to happen with a survey that's not even annual. It tends to happen over a couple of years, and then you get a delay in its publication. So it is an issue. However, we can get some idea of where productivity is going from those drivers. So though we have the 2-year lag in productivity data, we get some idea of where things are going based on the performance across those indicators. And that's why it's very welcome that the department has now set out some of the indicators they're using in the area of productivity. I think that's very important to have to create that continual awareness of how things are moving forward. However, there is an issue with this lag in our productivity statistics. Because we have this 2-year lag, it means if you do have an intervention now, you're not really going to necessarily see what the productivity numbers were even at that point in time until 2 years from now. And if you think about an executive term being 4 or 5 years, then actually you're going to be halfway through that before you actually know what your benchmark was at the start of that executive term. So it would be good to have some kind of indicators that are more up to date. However, we do get a sense of what's happening from other productivity drivers that we can measure. So it is an issue, but I think it's welcome that the department is now actually measuring these areas and including those as well as part of its business plan.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting, and I think there's a broader conversation there around, does there need to be like a more centralized approach in terms of the survey so that businesses can have access to that, because some businesses are going to fly way ahead and some businesses aren't. And I suppose you're nearly the businesses who are going to do this anyway are going to be the more successful businesses. They're going to be the more productive, the more innovative businesses. So you're nearly, the data might not always reflect that, because sometimes you're getting the ones at the two ends of the scale rather than in the middle. But I could talk about that all day because I find that really interesting. I think there's a lot of data in there that we could get. Just in terms, I want to just touch on 2 final points. One is a regional question, but I want before that to touch on, you've talked about the north-south productivity gap. And one of the kind of concerns that I have when we're looking at data is that we're talking about, we're comparing the north and we're saying, the north compared to Yorkshire or South England or London or Wales or Scotland or whatever. And obviously there are comparatives there. I mean, their economies aren't totally dissimilar to ours. But I do worry that we're boxing ourselves in to looking at only those economies. I mean, the economy that's most similar to us and that we have most in common with as the economy in the south, as the economy in the rest of this country. So in terms of that, how do we reorient our sort of stats to make sure that we're taking account of that? Consciously, like I'm in Derry, and I'm in a border region, and for many workers who are in Derry, they're working in Donegal and vice versa. So I'm just conscious that when we're looking at these stats, they maybe perpetuate that idea of a peripheral sort of identity, and that working in isolation. And I just think that if we're talking about All Ireland economy, that's maybe not the best way to do it. I'm just keen to get your views on that.
Yes, so it is important to think about where Northern Ireland looks similar to. And I think there is value looking both regionally within the UK and also across Ireland, across the island. If we thought of Northern Ireland in terms of its economy, because it is part of the UK macroeconomic environment, then at that macroeconomic level, it is affected by those issues. So Bank of England interest rates, as an example. And therefore, because of that context, it does mean it is important to look at some of the regions of the UK to understand how Northern Ireland performs. Traditionally, that would have been comparing, as you mentioned, Yorkshire, north of England, so the northeast of England particularly. Wales as well has tended to have very similar productivity performance to Northern Ireland over the past 50, 60 years. And if you looked at Scotland, we're sometimes compared to Scotland, but Scotland has sort of a divide down the middle. Western half of Scotland looks quite similar to Northern Ireland, particularly around Glasgow. Eastern half of Scotland and oil revenues as well means that Northern Ireland doesn't look quite as similar to that. So I think because of the macroeconomic environment, because Northern Ireland is part of the UK and part of that overall economic environment, it is important to have those comparisons. But I definitely think it's also important to compare Northern Ireland across this island and potentially regionally as well to the Republic of Ireland. This does have quite difficult issues around it. There have been efforts to try and better understand productivity regionally within the Republic of Ireland, and that is very difficult, particularly because of this issue of multinationals. And you get quite weird results at times regionally. But as I mentioned earlier in my opening statement, Belfast actually performs reasonably well on an all-island basis. But whenever you look outside Belfast, probably now Mid-Ulster is also a good performer. But the other areas of Northern Ireland tend to look a bit more like the other areas in the Republic of Ireland that have lower productivity. So if you take Donegal, for example, that would be an area that we would traditionally see as having low productivity on this island. So I think it is important to have those comparisons, but I think it is a dual approach of having comparisons both north-south and east-west as well.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I think that is important because we can become really boxed in on our viewpoint and our comparatives as well. So you've touched on my last point really on the regional stuff, and it's around Belfast and those productivity stats as well. Just keen to get your understanding of, have a small number of kind of higher productivity and larger companies skewed those figures, or is there a broader approach? Because I'm conscious that for such a small area in the north, for like the statistics are dramatically different. So it's to get a wee bit of understanding about that, and some more targeted interventions. Appreciate, like you've talked about, you know, R&D, you've talked about Skill Up, you've talked about those different programs. But it comes back to the point we were making earlier as well. Are the companies who are already going to be successful and already going to be drivers going to be the people who take up those incentives? If they're there, are they going to be the people who are already doing this? So how do you reach the companies that need that intervention but that aren't actually taking it up?
Yes, so I think that point around the regional aspect and measurement is important. So some work we did last year with new data that was released by NISRA was around productivity at the council level. And something that we concluded from that is you do tend to see the effect of star performers, high productivity firms, potentially skewing the results for a particular council area. And that's also at the other end of the distribution. We often talk about there being a long tail of underperforming firms, and the extent of that long tail, the number of underperformers, also affects the relative ranking of council areas. So it's important to remember, although certain council areas may rank higher than others, it doesn't necessarily mean that all firms there are poor productivity or high productivity. It's about the distribution. So we've started to get a better handle of that, but there is an issue where if you have particularly large firms, you see an effect on the productivity statistics. So to take an example, whenever you saw factories closing in Ballymena to do with Mitchell and Gallagher's, the productivity level for that area of Antrim declined dramatically. And it really came through on the numbers, and that's where you have just a couple of factories closing. So it is a small number of firms can make a big difference to the overall number. In terms of how firms are reached, I think this is the key challenge for policy here, is how we reach firms that are maybe doing okay and maybe aren't particularly interested in going a step further. So there's an issue of what is termed as satisficing, where businesses aim for a certain level of profit, and once they reach that, they stop. They're content with what they've made. They're not profit maximizers, as we would say in economics. So they're not going to necessarily take the next step to continue investing to try and go even further. And we can trace that issue of satisficing back through the past 100 years of Northern Ireland. That issue is long-standing. And therefore, the challenge for policy is how do you reach firms who, therefore, are content with where they are, but yet with maybe a small amount of support could actually improve their productivity quite substantially if they took a further step, whether it be around investment in machinery, investment in training, or exporting, for example. It is a key policy challenge. It's not a straightforward thing to address, but it's a very important one for policy here to consider.
No, brilliant. Listen, thanks very much. And I suppose the Minister's announcement yesterday around Invest hopefully begins to tackle that as well, and allowing more access and allowing more regional understanding from Invest as well. So hopefully that's yet another step in the right direction. So thanks very much for your answers. I could ask about a million more questions, but I'm sure other members want them. So thank you.
David.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, David, for your report and stuff. I'm just going to be really, really, really simple. Productivity is, because it gets used everywhere around, right? So it's the amount, it compares the amount of output to what it takes of input to make that output of goods and services. Yeah.
Yes. In the simplest form, yes.
In the simple text, that's what it is. Okay. So the low productivity, you've said we're 13% gap, and wealth comes from that export. But the report also says that the large public sector is not harmful for the economy. How do those two sit?
Yes, so there is the view that Northern Ireland's public sector is harmful for our overall performance here. And it's an issue that one of my colleagues, Graham Brownlow, at the Business School, has looked at in co-authored work. And in that work, they looked at Scandinavian economies. And they have quite a large public sector, but they're also high productivity. So these two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have a large public sector and high public expenditure, but also high productivity. It's how that expenditure is made, how effective it is. And something as well to sort of point out around Northern Ireland's public sector, it is traditionally seen as having a very large workforce, or percentage of the workforce in the public sector. But if you actually measure that per capita, we look very similar to Scotland. And Scotland is, outside of London and the southeast, the best performing UK region for productivity. So we shouldn't see a large public sector in and of itself as a barrier to high productivity. It's how we use that. And because it's a complex issue, there are lots of areas that feed into productivity, like health. Then actually we do need that public sector there to support the sort of overall business environment.
Okay. Whenever you look at the Nordic countries, Sweden, everything else, is a part of this that we haven't, or you haven't looked at, or I haven't seen anyway, is the education system before that. So has any work ever been done on looking at productivity and looking at our schools and colleges?
So there has been work looking specifically at the issue of education and productivity here. There was a report by the Economic and Social Research Institute a couple of years ago. The sort of short answer to it is we probably don't have enough of the right qualifications and the right skills. but it's maybe a little bit more complex than we traditionally think. We tend to simplify it down to simply an issue of we don't have enough graduate students. But I think there's a wider issue, and I think that report identified, particularly in the area of further education, there's an area below higher level degree where we miss out, for example, compared to the Republic of Ireland or compared to other UK regions. So there is an issue of how we're spending the money we have. Is it producing the workforce we need? And is it producing a workforce with the right skills, which goes beyond the issue of simply qualifications? Because ultimately, a business is using an individual and their skills, not simply their qualifications. So the evidence is there that this is an issue for Northern Ireland, but it potentially does require further look to understand how we might address that.
What I don't understand is how you can do a report on productivity and that is not absolutely fundamental to the report. Because how can you look? You're looking backwards rather than looking at the cause problem. We'll be sitting here in 5 years and we'll have exactly the same conversation, unless you took the root problem. So the culture full stop, is that our school system, the best jobs are law, medicine, teachers. But yeah, they're all public. No, Paul, I was going to say, but they're all public sector. You said a second ago about maximising profits for businesses, and they need to take the next step. That's risk. There's no point in school system that anybody get taught how to manage risk. But how can you look at productivity and not look at that issue? I don't know. I cannot get my head around. Other than we're looking backwards rather than looking forwards.
Yeah. So we do highlight the human capital issue as one of the main reasons for low productivity in Northern Ireland. So it is one that we see fundamentally as an issue, and it has been shown that this issue over time with low productivity is around human capital, education, skills. I think you raise a very important point around how from school through until the next step, are we preparing our young people here with the right education, and are we giving them the right opportunities that match what businesses need? Because as you say, we do, obviously with the large public sector, we do have quite a number who go on to do degrees in areas that would traditionally be seen to go into those areas. So I think that is a wider conversation of, are we actually targeting our education expenditure in the areas that matter most for business? But that is a wide, broad piece, and it would raise, a lot of questions about where we're spending money. I would say as well, the further education aspect is incredibly important if we think about regional balance. So if you want to see an improvement in productivity in Northern Ireland, that has to include further education, because further education is how a lot of those outside of Belfast particularly are accessing the potential skills they need as well. So I would emphasise that aspect to it.
Yeah, thank you. I agree completely, but I think it should be a fundamental part of any report we're looking at productivity. Is the absolute key issue is the next generation of wealth creators and developing them alongside your lawyers and everybody else. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for your presentation. It's been so interesting, and that's actually sparked a whole lot of other questions, but I'll focus on what I initially wanted to ask. And Gary had touched on it earlier on. Conscious that the productivity measures don't incorporate all the work that's done in the economy, and I'm really interested in the role of care and how that's overlooked and sort of undervalued. And Carers NI and NISRA had produced a report which said 83% of carers in Northern Ireland are working age and may want and need employment. What does the research you've seen, your opinion, not having paid carers leave and our lack of flexible working practices have on our productivity rates?
So probably with this area, I couldn't speak to it in a lot of detail because it's not an area I've specifically looked at myself in detail. But I think it does relate to sort of a wider issue, firstly about what we value in our economy in terms of work. There are a lot of that are effectively jobs that people are doing that is not traditionally seen as employment, yet it does a very important role in our economy. And that relates to what's sort of termed as social capital, which is a sort of underlying driver of productivity as well. So that's the connections between people. But then carers, for example, are doing a very important role. And we know that there are issues around the support available, particularly to those who end up being economically inactive in terms of how we define it as sort of an economist, yet they're active in the economy in terms of what they're actually doing, for example, caring. So it's an area we don't have a lot of good quality data on, and therefore that's why it's difficult to draw the direct link to productivity. But what I would say is a lot of what we're talking about with productivity is about maximizing the potential of people. And when there are barriers to people either engaging in the workforce or they're doing an important aspect that maybe isn't being rewarded or supported, that potentially means we're not maximizing their potential, we're not getting people into the right roles in the economy, or resources are not being sort of spread efficiently, to use a technical phrase. So unless we fully understand that, then actually it is difficult to try and address some of those issues that come up, particularly to do with economic inactivity.
Thank you. A fellow critical friend who was at committee last week, Dr. Pattison, actually, and when he was talking about the skills pipeline, an example of good practice mentioned going into primary schools and the interventions there. So I keep thinking a lot about what David just said, and you talked about FE, and you've talked a bit about this, but when you look at our skills deficit and the impact it has on productivity, what other interventions do you think we should be looking at?
So one area I think would be important to look at is lifelong learning. So that's an area that has tended to be less prioritised by policy, particularly given budget constraints. It tends to be lower down the priority list. But we also have a lot of focus on the people we're bringing into the workforce. But there's a lot of people who are in the workforce, and they're going to be in the workforce for another 30 or more years. And making sure they have the right skills is incredibly important, particularly if we think back to maybe what they might have missed out on whenever they left school, the issue of low or no skills previously over the past few decades. And that can have a positive effect beyond simply the individual engaging in the workforce. So if you want to think about inequality and deprivation, for example, and educational opportunities for children, for parents who maybe missed out on qualifications at an earlier stage in life, lifelong learning could actually not only benefit them as an individual, but also their children and their opportunities going into the workforce and through school as well. So I think that's an important area to consider. As well, around management practices, again, it's an area that has tended to be a little bit lower down the priority list. I know previously, over the past 10 years, it was something that was recognised by policymakers as important, but again, because of budget constraints, it tended to be the thing that was left off the list of interventions. So,
can you talk a bit more about that, about management practices?
Yes, so a lot of whenever I mention management practices, what I'm talking about is what's termed structured management practices. So this is how businesses and managers work with their employees, so how employees are rewarded, how employees are brought into the operation of the business in terms of targets, key performance indicators, how new employees are brought on board, and looking to try and make best use of people's talents. And that area has consistently been shown to be incredibly important for productivity. Internationally, we also now have evidence for Northern Ireland as well, and that we tend to underperform in this area. And that is a potential area where small amounts of money could go quite far in terms of interventions. There are some management training schemes that are available in Northern Ireland. We have produced a management booklet actually looking at some of those and what's available. But of course, businesses have a lot of time pressure, so it's trying to make sure that's available to them in an easily accessible way. And that's why it's welcome that the department has now included a greater focus on management practices. It's also in the programme for government as well. But I think that is a key area around the educational aspect that goes beyond the traditional area of qualifications. It's actually how our business is performing and individuals in them.
Also interesting, thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Jordan, so obviously the Minister's appointed 4 critical friends, and we've seen the outworkings of their advice on a number of different aspects. So regional balance produced yesterday, the minister's proposals on that. Good jobs bill coming forward the year after next. Do you see, or what discussions are you having with the department in terms of your advice? Do you see any standalone policies or standalone initiatives that, as a result of your advice to the department, will take forward?
I think there are two areas where most of my discussions have been centred around. So the first is on the measurement aspect, trying to understand how we best measure productivity and how we benchmark Northern Ireland's performance, and that gives something we can understand the effective interventions against. So that's ongoing. It's not at as an advanced stage as maybe some of the other areas, but that's very important. I think that is one of the most important things that the department can do, is to try and better understand the issue, but have those benchmarks and targets. The other aspect I've had discussions around would be relating to InvestNI and their implementation around productivity and what that means for their work. And one of the aspects is, how does InvestNI bring productivity in as something that it is targeting, but also therefore thinks about whenever it's providing support to business. So I haven't been involved in the full detail of that work. My role has really been to provide sort of advice and an opportunity as a sounding board. But those have been the two main areas, and I think my role with productivity has maybe been slightly different from the other three critical friends because of that, because it is quite broad reaching as well, whereas the others have those individual interventions.
And in terms of that InvestNI piece, Dr. Jordan, do you see what InvestNI should be doing is continuing to target those high value, innovative roles, rather than maybe 20 years ago that they were focused on lower paying but higher volume call centre jobs, say, for example? Do you believe then InvestNI's focus should be on attracting those higher paying, higher productivity jobs, rather than, so it's the quality of the employment that they, rather than the quantity?
Yes, so I would definitely agree it is the quality rather than quantity. And I think it's a welcome change that we're now starting to prioritise, particularly the productivity aspect of the quality. I think there has been a tendency across many years of policy here to focus on numbers of jobs created. And yes, unemployment was one of Northern Ireland's big economic problems in the past. That's no longer the case. That is not Northern Ireland's big economic problem. It is around low productivity. So I very much welcome the fact that this issue of productivity is being integrated into what InvestNI do. I think it is very welcome to focus on those high productivity sectors and firms and trying to bring in investment that complements that, because you do get what's termed spillover effects. So bringing in investment that not only benefits you have this new firm that's working here, it also benefits the supply chain and the surrounding business environment. However, I think it is also important not to lose sight of businesses who may not be the high performers at this stage, who with some support could improve their performance, and making or increasing awareness around this. I think it would be wrong to solely focus on only high performing firms, high productivity sectors. I think there should be a broad focus. And that does mean InvestNI will have to balance that. So it is complicated in that sense. But again, if you want to improve productivity across the whole economy, it does need that balance between those two aspects.
And then InvestNI's role, would it be in your view then that not only continue to attract FDI, but also then continue to invest in indigenous firms to raise their productivity?
Yes, I think that's a very important aspect to what they do and what they should be doing. And
yes.
I think from what I've seen, I think that's how the policy is going forward.
Thank you. I have nothing else from any colleagues online. Good. No, we're all good. Dr. Jordan, thank you very much for that. And thank you for your work. And we look forward to continuing to engage with you. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll ask him for more information right before the weekend.
Yes. Maybe if we see what stage the department's out of this benchmarking exercise.
But
We need to agree on that.
Yeah, we can do that after.
Yeah.
This one.
There would have been better quality and would have resulted in more, like, I don't understand.
That's why I was trying to take the work breakdown productivity days.
Yeah.
How are you? Okay, colleagues, we're now going to move on to item 7, sub-regional economic plan. Advised members of the committee will now receive oral evidence on the Minister's publication yesterday. Mr. Kieran McGarity, Head of City Deals and Programme Department for the Economy, Mr. Keith Brown, Head of Place and Sub-Regional Economy from the Department, Mr. Kieran Donahue, who members will be aware is the Chief Executive of Invest NI, and Mr. Alan McKeown, Executive Director of Regional Business at Invest Northern Ireland. Gentlemen, you are all very welcome. I'm sure it's been a busy few days for you, so we're delighted that you've made the time to come to committee. And at this stage, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee on the sub-regional economic plan, which was launched, as you know, by the Minister yesterday. As a department, we provided a written update to the committee last week, which laid out the key elements of the plan, which, as I said, the Minister's now launched, and I'm happy to take you through some of the more detailed issues of those and your questions. The plan, as you will be aware, is a key element of the department's approach to delivering the Minister's key priority of regional balance, and presents a significant opportunity to drive collaboration and local economic growth across Northern Ireland. It is focused very much on co-design and indeed partnership, and will play a key role in the delivery of the Minister's economic vision and that of the wider Executive's priority around regional balance. The plan provides the opportunity to strengthen economic growth at a local level, and importantly the opportunity to tailor partnerships to the need of the area, as well as the opportunity to determine key projects through the dedicated funding provided that will benefit that area. A key benefit of this approach is it provides increased access to the local voice and to building solutions from the bottom up. In the creation of this framework, engagement with local stakeholders has been positive. We have engaged with a variety of stakeholders across the last 6 months, specifically with the councils, the chambers and enterprise development agencies. These, we believe, are some of the key building partners that are needed to drive and sustain local economic growth. In terms of our next steps, our focus will be on supporting each of the 11 councils and their partners progress the creation of these local economic partnerships. We want this to happen within the next 3 months. Parallel to this, we will also agree with those partners the funding models that those partnerships will use in determination and delivery of identified actions. Within the department, we will also continue to look to see how we can align policies and programmes to the Minister's key priorities, especially those that will deliver an impact at a local level. As the Minister mentioned yesterday in his statement, Invest Northern Ireland will have a key role to play in this. Their role will be key in driving local economic growth, and it will flex and adapt its resources to support and drive that growth. This, as you will be aware in the committee, was a key recommendation of the Lands Review. I believe this is an exciting opportunity for us all to drive local economic growth. It's a chance to look at how co-design and partnership can drive prosperity for all. I also believe it's a chance to tailor solutions at a local level and not have one size fits all. I think that is key moving forward. It will also be an opportunity, as reflected in the programme for government, for other departments to consider how best they can support regional balance. I am certain that there will be some exciting proposals will emerge from cross-departmental discussions that will have the potential to support local economic growth and will work towards driving and reducing those imbalances that exist across Northern Ireland. In conclusion, the department and its ALBs are fully committed to working with local partners and other departments to drive the success of the sub-regional economic plan. This is a start for change, and positive progress has already been made. Much, however, remains to be done to deliver this ambition, but it's important that we all pull together to deliver that. I'm happy, and my colleagues here, to answer any questions the members may have.
Thank you very much, Kieran. Kieran, do you want to address anything at this stage?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to engage with you today. Invest Northern Ireland stands ready to drive implementation of the Minister's regional plan in partnership with our colleagues in DFE, local and regional stakeholders, but critically our client companies and international investors, whose investments right across Northern Ireland will be essential if we are to achieve the policy goal of improved regional balance. We have made increased business investment and regional development two of the key priorities of our new forthcoming 3-year business strategy, a briefing on which will be provided in advance to this committee later today, and then we'll subsequently commence a formal public consultation later this week. I'm happy to take any questions you might have on Invest Northern Ireland's specific role in driving the policy goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And firstly, can I say from the outset, I welcome the Minister's work to tackle regional balance. Northern Ireland needs to work for every community if it is to continue to grow and prosper. But I do have a number of questions I just want to raise in relation to the sub-regional economic plan. If we could just start firstly with the local economic partnerships. How are the department defining need in relation to how the funding formula will be co-designed?
That is an opportunity for us all to engage on that formula. There's a pot of £45 million that the Minister has identified. How that is allocated will be dependent on what the priorities are that the Minister sees, and also local partnerships will be. We have a set of indicators that look at in the economic vision, whether it's on productivity, whether it's an employment rate, whatever, and we will look at those to see how that influences and shapes that funding formula. The key is about regional balance. The key is about closing the gaps between those. So those councils, and I think you'll have seen in the document itself the sort of traffic lights that system we had to have. You can see clearly the likes of Causeway Coast and Derry City and Strabane. So whatever way the funding needs to go, those are the areas that are the greatest need in terms of moving forward, and that will be the principles moving forward. But those formula are something that we will engage with colleagues about.
So need will be defined by these 4 headline indicators?
And there's sub-indicators below that there that you'll have seen in the economic vision in terms of doing that, and we need to make sure that all councils benefit from this and how we do it. So there are various formula, and you can see from other partnerships such as labour market partnerships how they're allocated. It could be a flat rate around that each council gets the same amount to begin with, a certain percentage, and then the remaining percentage is determined by the indicators that we deem most appropriate.
Ultimately, that will be determined by the department.
In the first instance, it'll be a range of, but the Minister is very clear.
So when will we get that formula?
Well, we are working through with Solus over the next 2 or 3 months on that formula, and we will engage again with the committee in terms of happy to present. Here's where we've arrived at there. I think the context, if you look at 45 million, and if you look at 15 million per annum, and if you divide it by 11, and if you add in the administrative costs, it is not a significant budget that goes across each councillor. You'll appreciate that there. So the variance between the best performing on the poorest or less good regions will not be that significant in relative terms to the overall spend that needs to be made on regional balance right across the economy.
And that 45, how does that break down between capital and revenue?
And this is what we need to work through. And ultimately, the 45 minutes is very clear. This is the bottom of proposals. We don't know what the proposals will be. We're hoping that they will be significant. There will be a mix of capital and resource, and we have already engaged through my team, and Keith has led in that with each of the councils, looking through what are the types of actions that might emerge, and you see trying to deliver. The focus is very much on action. So it will be determined by our sense and engaging with those councils and other partners about what needs to happen. The Minister has already mentioned a number of opportunities, perhaps around infrastructure, perhaps around other issues that can be unlocked through this funding, or it could be top-up funding for another programme or project that a council or other partners might have. But we don't know that, and we want to give them that right to local partnerships to determine what those priorities are.
Sure, but if we're approaching these local partnerships and I see in the next steps the deadline or aim to do that is by December, if we're approaching these local partnerships and saying we don't know what the breakdown of the funding is between capital and revenue, we don't know how much you may or may not be able to draw down, does it not make those conversations really difficult?
We will certainly have a range of funding. So again, I made this, so there's £15 million if you're looking at a year. If you divide that by 11 and take out the overheads, you know that what range you're in. In terms of the projects, again, with our engagement, there are ideas out there at local level about what things need to happen. And that's now, this meaningful engagement needs to begin now about what is deliverable in the timescale. I think that's going to be really important, because this fund is not to be there for something that needs to happen in 5 or 6 years. The focus very much on the Minister's action and delivery in this mandate, and we know the issues that need to be. Councils, local stakeholders know what issues need to be addressed. There are various examples you may have heard last week from evidence given to you by Dr. Patterson. There are various examples around there where opportunities can be unlocked with small amounts of funding.
Yeah.
And we want to give that very much to the delegate that decision making down to the local partnerships. But key upon that is we need to make sure that those actions fit within the wider vision, so we don't have duplication. We don't have 11 different or 11 same projects in each area because everybody wants the same thing.
Okay. Just turning then to the regional strategic approach, and I know this document was co-designed between the department and Invest. Who came up with the boundary being the Belfast metropolitan area? Was that the department or Invest NI?
That was the department, in terms of looking at how we drive, what target drives delivery of the ambition of regional balance.
Why was BMAP chosen as that?
So initially, traditionally, it may have been the Belfast City Council area, and we've looked to beyond. So in the sense that a project that, or investments or a scale of projects that were increasing the adjacent council areas could be delivering that regional balance objective. And that's not what we felt was appropriate to deliver the ambition around regional balance. This is not about one region losing out as opposed to another region. This is about growing the entire region, but recognising that additional support is needed and outside of those 4 council areas to drive up activity.
What's the population of BMAP?
I think it's 58%, but of the Northern Ireland population, but I could be.
Yeah, it's 58% within, as we've defined the metropolitan area.
And you've defined that as those 4 council areas. So I don't represent Ards and North Down, but if we look at your indicators, so we're saying that the focus is on those outside BMAP. So Ards and North Down, in terms of labour productivity, ranks the 2nd lowest in the entirety of Northern Ireland. Median wages represents the worst anywhere in Northern Ireland. Sub-regional employment rates represent 8th out of 11. But yet, if I lived in Ards and North Down and I was reading this document and said the focus of Invest NI, 65% of their investment will be outside of my area, and I rank one of the worst council areas, how do you answer that to them?
So it's not investment; it's a number of projects in terms of moving forward. The key for us isn't about anybody losing out. It's the focus of efforts will be outside those areas. We will continue.
Why is it outside of Ards and North Down if it's ranked one of the lowest anywhere in Northern Ireland?
Because this is the target is outside of that BMAP area, does not mean that Invest NI will not be supporting companies, and we recognise we have to drive up activity and productivity in those areas.
But you've made clear in your document that you're prioritising, by putting down 65% v 35%, you're prioritising areas outside of BMAP. So if you live in Ards and North Down and you look at your figures and you're in need of most support and most focus, how does the department explain to them that that's not, in their view, the case?
I think maybe just to be clear, we will continue.
No, you will, but your focus, you've said 65% will be outside of BMAP. What I'm saying is that the Ards and North Down is one of the areas in need of the most support, as borne out by your figures. I'm just reading what you put down. Why were they not included in this? I just struggle with the BMAP as a artificial boundary. BMAP has not been used anywhere in Northern Ireland for anything else. It's been struck down by the courts even as a planning document. I'm just trying to find a rationale for BMAP, and you haven't been able to quite provide one. You say it's based on the need of those areas, but the figures that the department has provided to us clearly shows that that doesn't stack up.
I think just from a department's perspective, the challenge for us is to grow all business, and I know you appreciate that there. There's significant investment and focus needs to be on areas that traditionally have not benefited from Invest NI focus previously, and that's what the challenge is moving forward, just now to move to those areas. But it does not mean that Invest NI will not focus, is not looking at supporting those in Ards and North Down in terms of trying to grow the business base, trying to grow productivity, etc.
No problem at all. I'm not sure that really answers that question. To be fair, Ards and North Down 44% lower median wages than in Belfast, and they're being included in an artificial map, which many may see has been used to try and justify investment in particular areas. But the data produced for Ards and North Down, and I'm not a representative of the area, but if I was and I read the rankings for that area, and to say that wouldn't be prioritised, I think would be questionable. In terms of the restructuring of the Department for the Economy, could you maybe talk to the committee about how the department's going to be restructured?
Yes, so within the economic growth section of the department, and looking forward, what we are providing is increased resource around driving regional balance. So traditionally the department has left primarily the engagement with local authorities and local stakeholders primarily to invest in terms of local economic growth and community planning, etc. The department will increase its resources to take up that mantle and work directly with Invest NI and other partners at a local level to try and build capability and build capacity at a local level to identify those opportunities that collectively we think can support drive growth in those areas. So for example, I would use the city and growth deals as an example. So we are working more directly with councils in all across those areas to try and exploit the opportunities that the significant investments through city and growth deals will be made.
So maybe I'm reading it wrong. So restructure to me means new posts created, other posts abolished.
There's new posts being created and certainly in regional balance, looking forward to that.
Has that gone out to consultation with trade unions, consultation with staff?
We're going through a process now within Economic Policy Group of realignment and refocusing our resources, and trade unions are involved in that.
And then posts will be then publicly advertised, or?
I think this is about prioritisation, so it's necessarily looking at where best does the department utilise its resources. So it's not necessarily about recruiting more, it's about repurposing the work that individuals are doing.
I wondered if you could not conclude it in this document, but just include it in the statement that the Minister made. Just wondering if you could talk to me about the department's expertise in managing airports.
I'll have to come back to you on that. I'll come back to the committee, give the committee an answer.
Obviously the Minister didn't give a huge amount of detail, but on page 2 of his statement said, my department is in the process of taking responsibility for the funding provided to the City of Derry Airport.
I'm happy to come back to the committee on that.
You don't have any further details?
Not me today, it's not my area, but I'm happy to get some information back to the committee on it.
Just turning then to Kieran, how long are you in post now? 6 months long?
8 months, Chair.
8 months. How's it going?
Very well.
Good.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for all the work that you continue to do. I'm just keen to take your view on the BMAP issue. That wasn't put forward by Invest NI.
No, it wasn't put forward by Invest NI, Chair, but it was ultimately agreed in partnership with Invest NI. So there was considerable back and forth and interaction between us and colleagues in the department. And we understand that in pursuit of the policy goal, we needed to come up with a basis for measuring whether we were achieving the policy goal and delivering more investments outside Belfast and adjacent areas. When we did our research and analysis, we identified that 60% of our current portfolio, so Invest NI right now has an active core portfolio of about 1,400 companies. They employ 130,000 people. 60% of those are already located outside the Belfast metropolitan area. So when you think about it, in pursuit of a policy goal of regional balance, what we will have to do now as a public body is double down on our engagements and relationship with those clients that already reside outside the Belfast metropolitan area, businesses that have been established in and near their communities, and encourage them to reinvest. That's something that we're going to have to do. But that will not be at the expense of Belfast or adjacent areas. So to your very legitimate question in relation to Ards and North Down, We already have a portfolio of installed clients within Ards and North Down, so we will be engaging with them simultaneously to encourage them to reinvest. We will be reaching out to support entrepreneurs who want to establish new businesses in Ards and North Down and within the Belfast metropolitan area. And we will continue to leverage Belfast as part of our efforts to promote Northern Ireland internationally to win higher levels of foreign direct investment. So as a conceptual framework for approaching the issue of achieving greater regional balance, the BMA, non-BMA approach is something that we can work with.
And just in terms of that discussions with the department, so the department's view was should be BMAP. Did Invest NI put forward any alternative proposals of what the boundary or artificial boundary should be in terms of how we judge this?
We didn't put forth any alternative proposals. We understood the logic being advanced by the department. So their legitimate concern was that if we were to deliver more and more investment both into the Belfast city area and adjacent areas like Lisburn and Castlereagh and Antrim and Newton Abbey, that would be counted as the achievement of regional balance on a Northern Ireland-wide basis, and that other parts of Northern Ireland on that basis could lose out. So they wanted to give us a target for those council areas outside BMA so we can achieve a more equitable distribution of investment and economic opportunity right across Northern Ireland.
Not part of this point, but I get the issue of Greater Belfast. You know, we need to see all sections of Northern Ireland being invested in and grow. But if I was wondering if that was my thoughts in my head going. But if you live in Portaferry or you live in Randallstown or if you live in Toonbridge, I'm not quite sure you would define yourself as living in the Belfast City or Greater Belfast City area, and I just think that because you're somehow included in a artificial boundary of BMAP, I just think that we struggle with that. In terms of Invest NI, Kieran, the Minister's vision says that under your section that you will work with DETE in the Republic of Ireland to develop a MOU on all island economic priorities. I just wondered if you could talk about that.
So as you know, we have identified a set of, well, firstly, the Republic of Ireland is a potential source of significant investment for Northern Ireland. So already investors in the Republic have contacted me, given my new role, saying, can we have a conversation about investing Northern Ireland? So that's the type of practical conversation that we're already having with investors in the Republic to ensure that they look at Northern Ireland as an area of opportunity, and I believe a number of them will over the next number of months. If you broaden that out then to an all-island context, there is significant already cross-border trade, cross-border collaboration and cross-border activity between our clients that reside in Northern Ireland and their suppliers and their customers in the Republic. The proposal to develop a memorandum of understanding is effectively to codify and ensure that the authorities north and south are on the same page about identifying economic opportunities that will benefit people both north and south, and also to identify potential challenges that we might need to jointly try and address, particularly in relation to infrastructure, the electricity grid, etc.
Perfect. And not just related to this, Kieran, but just while we have you here, how's the economic outlook looking for Northern Ireland at the minute in terms of your continued work and the success of Invest NI?
Overall, Chair, I would say that the feedback I've received from our clients is positive. They have very strong order books. They're exporting successfully with the now likely reduction in interest rates and with inflation coming down. The overall outlook is generally positive. There are some challenges in some specific sectors that are specific to those sectors and those companies. They work in sectors that are going through a particular business cycle, so they have challenges. But overall, the feedback that we're receiving from clients is positive. They aren't shy about drawing our attention to some challenges as well. So they have said to us, we could reinvest more if we could find more people. Yeah. We would reinvest more if we could find more skills. And we would reinvest more if there was land available nearby, service land, and if we could get suitable grid connections to the electricity grid. So these are, and also there's a water services issue. So these are issues that we're discussing with our partners in Northern Ireland Water and Northern Ireland Networks, and with councils and local stakeholders to identify a plan in which we can address these challenges to give our clients opportunities to continue to invest. But overall, the mood music is positive for the vast majority of clients.
Does that feed in, and is that the regional property programme that was mentioned in the economic vision?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we have identified a need for Invest to acquire more lands right across Northern Ireland. So I have spent a lot of the last 8 months travelling around to the various regions to get a feeling for the communities that I now serve, to meet local clients and businesses and stakeholders. And they have said, if you provide more land in this area, then more clients will be attracted to the area and more clients will want to re-expand. So we have made a formal proposal to the department to consider a brand new regional property programme. So we will be acquiring land and putting advanced offices and other solutions in place to raise the overall attractiveness of various locations for investment.
And does that include the whole of Northern Ireland?
Yes, whole of Northern Ireland. So we'll be picking particular locations right across Northern Ireland that will be suitable for this regional property programme, but it will be inclusive.
And Kieran, have we got is there a budget been set for that programme yet? No.
There hasn't been a formal budget allocated, but we have worked up some estimates which we're in discussion with the department about what that type of programme would cost. Chair, it will be a long-term programme when you consider the lead time to acquire land, to develop it, to secure planning, etc., and then to make the necessary infrastructure connections. While the regional plan is a 3-year plan and our new business strategy is a 3-year plan, the proposed regional property programme will be a 10-year plan.
And then just finally, Kieran, so the incentivising delivery of FDI outside of BMAP, what are going to be the additional incentives offered to companies?
So specifically with respect to foreign direct investment, we're going to set a target for the number of foreign direct investments that we want to win over the 3 years. Yeah. Those investments will be broken down and assigned to a new set of operating regions that we're going to develop to help implement the regional plan. The regional property investment plan that we just spoke about will be one of the incentives that we will eventually be able to present investors with, so they'll have a turnkey solution in terms of locating in a particular area. And then we will be making sure that our funding of investments willing to go into particular locations is as attractive as possible, because we need to use our incentives proactively to encourage multinationals to go to particular locations. FDI, I think it's important to say, while small and medium-sized enterprises and micro businesses will remain a key feature of our strategy as they currently are, because foreign direct investors are by definition more locationally mobile, they will be an important instrument to drive the achievement of the overall regional balance objective.
But have we got a formula? So if you invest in BMAP, you get X, but if you invest outside of BMAP, you get X plus £1 per job, £10 per job. You know, have we got a...
That's one way of approaching it. So the way we will approach it is that this is ultimately depending on the nature of the client and what their needs are. So whether we're working in the United States or working in continental Europe or Asia, our job as a promotional body is to firstly convince those investors to come to Northern Ireland. That's the first thing that we have to achieve. Once they're committed to Northern Ireland, we will then have an assessment, a conversation with them about which location in Northern Ireland will best meet your needs in terms of skills, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of transport and logistics. If the company is locationally agnostic, so they're saying we would be happy to go to Belfast, or we'd be happy to go to Enniskillen or Omagh or Strabane or the Northwest. In the context of pursuing a regional balance goal, it would therefore make sense for us to bias our funding package to encourage them to select that location elsewhere in Northern Ireland, knowing that there will be subsequent investments and more investment opportunities for Belfast. On the other hand, if the client says to us, it has to be Belfast for these reasons, we will tailor a funding package for companies to make sure that they select Belfast as well. So it's always done on a case-by-case basis, and it's company and context dependent. There's no hard and fast rule.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary.
Thanks, Chair. From the outset, I want to say I do welcome the document, notwithstanding the comments, of course, that the Chair has made, which I share around the BMAP. If anything, page 7 of that document, the matrix, I think, clearly shows that when we talk about regional imbalance, we're not talking about one council area or one constituency. It very much affects quite a number of constituencies, not least Ards North Down or Causeway Coast and Glens, or indeed, without mentioning my own constituency as well. For me, the concern that I have, so the local economic partnerships, in our constituency, we have the Strategic Growth Partnership. We are very shortly, assuming the Chancellor doesn't cut it, the Towns Board for the Towns Fund, which is £20 million over 10 years for our constituency, £2 million a year. We also have various other boards. So what is going to be so different about these partnerships? And Kieran, before I bring you in, you're possibly going to say, well, there's money here. There's a very small amount of money. I appreciate it as some, but when you do work, you've broken it down. It's slightly over £1.3 million per year. Take out all of the admin, all of those costs, you're going to have very little left, actually, to do very much. So could you maybe talk us through as to what do you envisage these partnerships been able to actually do that is different from some of the boards that already exist?
I'm happy to get Gary. The key difference, I think. So you have community planning partners. Right? I know there's a host of partnerships there. Money is important to bring business to the table. And I'm sure you sit in many partnerships. I'm sure some of your private sector leaders in your constituency sit in those partnerships too. But they only sit in those partnerships if they do things and have delivery. And this funding that will be provided to them is designed to be catalytic, to kickstart, to complement. So that is a key difference moving forward. I think we are very cognizant of the fact that there is a cluttered landscape out there. A cluttered landscape at a local government level, and some councils say, here's another partnership, that's the last thing we need. That's why the Minister is very clear in this flexibility. It will be for Derry City and Strabane to work through what type of partnership they need, how does it complement the community plan, how does it complement the growth partnership. But the issue for us moving forward is that this partnership is focused on action. This is focused on a small number of key actions that can happen quickly with funding that traditionally, if they had to come to the Department of S&I, might not have been on their priority to do. It's a bit like, I compared a little bit to the city and growth deal process, where local decision makers, and I always give the example in your own constituency of Strabane, that health centre would not have been funded in Strabane without city and growth deal funding. Now I know it's a different comparison of scale, but the principle of your council area and partnership with locals decided that that partnership would move up significantly up the capital. There's a list of capital projects in the Department of Health, moved it up the top because it was leveraging that funding. Now, at a much smaller scale, your partnership could decide that, and I want flexibility around that funding. I would like it the same way as City Growth Deal, that it is ring fenced, and that's a challenge. We'll have to move forward, that it can carry on, so it's not becomes a spending challenge every January or February. How do we get this money spent so that it can? We have some sort of flexibility moving forward. So it does become 3 million or over 3 million over 3 years, and you might be able to do something with it. It could help unlock some of the issues that Kieran has been explaining there in terms of how do we unlock planning or how do we unlock infrastructure. Could, but that's a matter for those.
And can I ask in terms of the department's role and their oversight? So I appreciate, look, we see it with city and growth deals. There's various, with respect, councils that have more expertise than others in these types of things. So Belfast, for example, we're ahead in terms of obviously developing their projects, followed by our council, followed by other areas. So there's a difference in terms of expertise. What I'm saying is, if you look at the likes of Causeway Coast and Glens, who have had their city deal and growth deal paused, which will have a devastating impact in terms of some of their projects. What is the role of the department in terms of that oversight, ensuring that when projects and these discussions happen, and I'm all for flexibility, but at the same time we need to ensure that whenever the funding has been put out, that it's done in a fair and equitable and an inclusive way, that not just within constituencies that people are getting their fair shout, but right across Northern Ireland. So how does the department have oversight over these partnerships?
And ultimately, we are going to give guidance to the partnerships to utilise the funding. We will give guidance on what that funding should be used for in terms of the process. We want to engage with councils who will ultimately be accountable for the funding in terms of the same way they are in the city and growth deals. and to ensure that there is transparency is absolutely key. This is public funding going in and do it. And that's the challenge, and councils are up for this. I've met with the SOLAS, I've met with chief executives, and they are up for this approach of engaging in partners into design and to reduce the level of bureaucracy and administration that normally comes with it. But there is an approval rule, an endorsement rule for the department and Invest NI when these projects start to emerge from the partnerships, because a genuine and valid criticism would be that we have 11 partnerships coming back wanting to do the 11 same things. We have to say no. We have to say no. So it has to test the VFM test, managing public money, etc. But it also has to tie in strategically to where Northern Ireland is going, as well as that region. And that's where Invest NI, and I hope Causeway Coast, Philip and others, and even Jonathan in Mid-South, we are working directly with those growth deals now. Through Invest NI, through the department, directly supporting and developing the right projects and how we exploit those things. And that will continue at scale.
Two very brief questions. Again, it's on the issue of readiness. You've said that sort of within the next 3 months you expect these partnerships to be up and running. Obviously, there's a 3-year period of £45 million. How confident are you that actually that all of the guidance that you talk about, that in terms of projects, the funding mechanism, all of that can be done to ensure actually that money can be spent?
I'm confident because we've been doing, my team over the last 6 or 9 months have been doing parallel processing, looking at what does that, learning from labour market partnerships, learning from the LEADER programme, learning all the concerns that were raised in various others. So we have a menu of options. Come back to the chair's point earlier, there is a menu of how you splice and dice this that moving forward. In terms of the partnership approach ourselves, we're very much in the case. Guidance has been done already for LEADER, labour market partnerships. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. So I am confident, and there's a willingness and an openness, and we've been out with chambers, out with the local enterprise agencies, out with the councils. There's a willingness for them to receive, so long as the flexibility is there to make things move forward at a pace.
Just a final question, it's for the other Kieran. Kieran, Invest NI has obviously, sometimes not actually legitimately, but they have been coming to criticism actually in my constituency about their operation. I think they've done their best with the hand that they had. When do you expect to see the 40% increase in terms of those jobs being put out into the various regions? When do you see that happening? How soon can that happen? The chair has touched on rightly so. We have to respect the rights, obviously, of workers as well in terms of their terms and conditions. But when do you see that process being finalised and we start to see additional resources being put in to those regional offices? And I appreciate, that your headquarters as well. People don't necessarily have to be in a specific place to do a specific job.
Well, now that the regional plan has been formally announced, we're in a position now to begin the process of hiring those people. So we have written up draft job specs, so they're being subject to an internal review and assessment. And we will offer opportunities across our regional office network, both to existing staff, because we have made regional development a core priority within our new organisational strategy. And at our last staff briefing, I invited colleagues to put their hand up to play an active role in driving the regional development agenda. So a number of colleagues have said to us, we'd like to be part of that. So there'll be redeployment of existing staff into regional roles in the across the regional office network. And then in situations where we might need specific new or additional skills, we will go to the marketplace. So I would expect the hiring process to begin, the appointment process, if it's redeployments, to begin between now and the end of the year, and that we would have most or all of the full complement of the 40%, which in absolute terms is about 20 additional staff in place by the end of Q1 next year. So we're talking about March, April next year.
And scope for additional jobs. When the Minister answered a question to a colleague yesterday in the chamber, he alluded to the fact that these weren't new jobs, obviously they were redeployments. So what you're saying, Kieran, is that actually you do have scope to employ additional staff if there's skill gaps, is that right?
It'll be a mix of redeployments and as appropriate new hires, but clearly we'll have to liaise with the Minister's department on the budgetary implications of that. But for example, if we needed to hire someone with specific skills to drive the regional agenda, and existing staff didn't have those skills, it would make sense for us to liaise with our colleagues in the department and the Minister to hire for that specific role or roles.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You, David?
Thank you, all four of you coming in. I really welcome the changes. Welcome the changes in Invest as well. We've been critical in the past, so it's good to see that change coming through and starting to push. I raised yesterday for business, entrepreneurs, everything else. The underlying problem here is the planning system. So you can have everything you want, but if you can't get something built, you've got nothing. And so I appreciate it's not your gig, so I'll not go there. But one of the just to follow on from Philip, because this is, you're going to hear this from everybody, but that metropolitan plan, that BMAP. So whenever you look at the plan, what we have in my area, in Lagan Valley, is a car park on the motorway to Belfast. Yet, if you look at, and I welcome what you said about the land, I would just like to tease that out. We have no land. So if you look at all the rest of the council areas for Invest of 85 acres, of 100 acres, the thing, I think 2 years ago there was 3, and that's nearly gone. So there's nothing there. So it's one thing to say we're going to invest, but if there's nowhere to put it, we actually have land right beside the motorway on the Dublin Belfast Economic Corridor, and it's not been utilised. Is that the sort of land that we're talking about could be purchased by Invest to start creating spaces, the places that the companies would want to invest in?
Kieran, on the property, and I'll just give a context again of the funding. Again, this is an example where I would say a local partnership, if there was some enabling works that needed required in that partnership that is created in Lisburn Castle, we identified that as a priority. That's the type of thing that can move projects like that forward to unlock further investment. But it's just a wider context, and I believe Kieran to cover the property.
So I think your point on planning was well made. It's a real challenge, and I think we need to have a frank discussion about what we can do in Northern Ireland to address that issue. So whether it's a special fast-track planning process for key strategic investments, enabling Northern Ireland to invest Northern Ireland to acquire and develop land as quickly as possible. They're conversations that policymakers need to have, and we'd be more than willing to participate in that type of conversation. Specifically then on your point with respect to property, we're already talking to colleagues in the department to almost do an audit of where there's lands already in public ownership, where those lands are located across Northern Ireland, because they would be the obvious candidates, for example, to acquire land reasonably quickly, because the speed of execution will be important in relation to our overall strategy. And we have a dedicated land and property team, so they know where we have existing property assets. They know exactly where we don't have enough land or no land at all. And some local stakeholders and councils have made this point to me, and client companies as well. And it's something we will need to address as part of a brand new land and property strategy, a draft of which is with our colleagues in the department.
Who leads that conversation and plan? I know yourself, you'll say we're up for that conversation. The department will say we took it for granted that this is happening, but DFI are saying no, hold on. So you've multiple players and everybody wants the conversation, but nobody actually leads. Who leads that? Who needs to lead that conversation?
I don't know who should lead it. We will be liaising with the Department for the Economy to ensure that an economic perspective on this conversation is reflected in any debate. It could be the Department for Infrastructure.
Yeah, and certainly, David, the Minister's up for and has already engaged with DFI on a number of issues, and will continue, and wastewater is another issue in terms of planning. You know the sorts of issues. These issues need to be addressed, and it needs to be in the context of collaboration across departments and moving forward. He is very clear on that.
Forgive me to the chair, my colleague.
I just wanted to add, I suppose, one of the things we do is have an active conversation with all 11 councils and their planning teams around what's going on, and what's now, what's for the future, and looking at some of those key barriers that are stopping progress from happening. Not all of the planning system is bad. There are elements of the planning system that operate very well, and it's about zeroing in on the things that we need to work together on. And I think what this regional strategy and the ambition in the regional strategy does, it says, look, we need to get together as a team and address where those issues are. There may be some flexibility in the fund at how partners want to prioritise that spending to unlock some of those. So the opportunity really sits within the new kind of culture we want to build to try and unlock those processes so they're not seen as a constant block, but they're seen as something that we can work our way through and come up with new solutions on.
No bother. Just to move on slightly, when you find that bit that's good in the planning system, you can send that to me because I'll appreciate it. It's not my experience. Philip also put about the Department of Enterprise and the MOU. Okay, and I've been asking for that partnership with the IDA and to attract investment north and not kind of trying to compete. But what's Invest NI's priorities of what you're trying to achieve with that?
In the context of the
MOU.
MOU,
Yeah.
we would have two priorities. One, developing an understanding with the authorities in the Republic and with IDA, so that hopefully in the future, where there is an investment that might not work in the Republic but would work in Northern Ireland, that the authorities in the South, including IDA, would refer that investment to us proactively. So developing that type of relationship. Speaking frankly, I think that it'll take time to get there because we are competing bodies right now. But as you know, I have strong relationships with that former body, and so nurturing those for our mutual benefit is something that I'll want to do strategically. And then equally nurturing our relationship with Enterprise Ireland. So right now we partner with them, so we have a Leadership for Growth program. And a lot of clients here go down and participate in that program and have brought very positive feedback from that program because they're sharing their experiences with similar companies in the Republic and pooling their knowledge. And the management teams in our clients that have participated in that program has said it has helped them to grow, to scale and to export. And from talking to our clients right across Northern Ireland, they're now talking to me about identifying economic opportunities for them in the market in the Republic, whether that's with customers or with suppliers. Some of our clients are acquiring businesses in the Republic, and then equally there are businesses in the Republic that want to do more business with our clients in Northern Ireland. So the Memorandum for Understanding is just a framework for facilitating and encouraging that positive behaviour for our mutual benefit on an all-island basis.
Okay, so we're not looking at inward investment or selling Northern Ireland around the world through the IDA or
no.
Okay.
No, the Invest Northern Ireland has that mandate for Northern Ireland. We do, for example, participate in overseas trade missions with Enterprise Ireland right now. So the Minister and I'll be joining the Minister on a joint programme with Enterprise Ireland going to target financial technology opportunities in Asia in November. And I maintain a bilateral dialogue with IDA. So eventually there may be more formal cooperation with IDA, but at the moment it's informal.
Okay.
So let me give you an example. For example, in developing our land and property strategy, IDA Ireland used a land and property strategy to deliver more investment across the regions of the Republic, and they started that process about 20 years ago. So my land and property team recently met with their colleagues in IDA to share knowledge and experience, so any of the challenges that they encountered in delivering that program, that we were aware of them before we commenced a similar exercise up there. So there is that operational cooperation and sharing experiences.
You mentioned companies, part of that was companies in the south that have overcapacity and wanting to come north or move north and that. Whenever you've spoken to any of those companies, has corporation tax rates been a barrier?
No, corporation tax hasn't been a barrier. So some companies in the Republic are experiencing capacity constraints in the Republic. So they've reached out to us to say, could you enable us to reinvest on the island of Ireland, but in Northern Ireland? So we're having those conversations with them. They haven't mentioned corporation tax as a barrier to their decision making, quite likely because any entity they would establish in Northern Ireland would be structured as a cost plus centre, and therefore it wouldn't be profit generating to the extent the corporation tax would become a material concern.
And just finally then, on the wider piece, is corporation tax rates on the island, the differential, a barrier at all, a problem for anybody investing into Northern Ireland?
No clients have said to me, we will not or cannot invest in Northern Ireland because of your corporate tax rate. So they haven't said that to me. But at a policy level, if it was the case that our corporate tax rate was equivalent to or lower than the rate in the Republic, that would strengthen our value proposition for certain types of foreign direct investment. But we live in the here and now, and that's not right now an obstacle to us attracting foreign direct investment.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentations. The worst thing about coming in at this stage is you have questions you want to ask, and then all these different thoughts pop into your head. But I'll try and stick with what I had planned originally. We think this is brilliant, and the regional sub-regional balance is absolutely critical. And there are some gaps that I'd be interested to get a bit more information about decarbonisation and things like that. But the first point I wanted to make as a Belfast MLA is that we know that Belfast is an economic driver for the region. And I just want to get a bit more detail on how you see these two realities of kind of not taking the foot off the pedal in Belfast because it's taken so long to catch up, but also the need for regional balance, how you reconcile those two aims.
Yeah, first and foremost, that's absolutely clear. Cities are drivers of growth. You know, there's no doubt about that. OECD, 80% of all productivity comes from cities. We need to develop and exploit the assets that those cities have. So that's absolutely critical to driving economic growth moving forward. What we need to do is make sure, but that was there's a premise there based, well, if Belfast does well, everybody else does well. I think the evidence has shown us that's not the case. So we still need to grow Belfast, but we need to grow other areas faster and better and more targeted than perhaps we have done before. And that's the challenge. But it's definitely not about no more Belfast, everything outside Belfast. So I know that's not what you're suggesting, but it's very much cities are drivers of growth. Populations are, so those other cities in Northern Ireland, we need to develop those. They have the assets, they have the infrastructure there in place that we need to sweat. But we need, and you heard earlier about on productivity, about the gap in productivity. That's what we need to close in those sub-rural and those regional areas away from Belfast. So there is 30 points difference in productivity between Belfast City Council area and Causeway Coast and Derry. That needs to close. Yeah. And that's the challenge of this plan.
And I think the focus on partnership is absolutely right. Can you talk a bit more about the local economic partnerships, the conversations that have been had with councils, how that fits in with the labour market partnerships, how you don't duplicate, just to get a sense of the work that's happened so far?
We've been doing engagement through Solus and through their economic development directors. I spoke to NILGA last week. We've had one-to-one meetings with various councils and local economic agencies. The principle here, and just going back to what I said earlier, is we recognise that this is clear, but we recognise the decision about that construct and where that construct sits in a local area is a matter for local stakeholders in the first instance.
So your role as a department is primarily on kind of funding as opposed to policy.
We need to make sure, just so I'm not devolving any responsibility, we need to make sure those partnerships are truly reflective of local areas. I think the Minister's made that clear, that this is not a council subcommittee. Yeah. This is reflective, but I give example in a rural constituency or a rural council, you might have Ulster Farmers Union or whatever on the agri side. You may not have that in Belfast. But that doesn't matter for those partnerships, and it shouldn't be for us. What we want to make sure is that, and I've spoken at length, and the Minister has been out to see all the chambers, or most of all the chambers, making that point of how do we get local business involved. Certainly I spoke to CBI and presented them on how do we get that overarching private sector involved, because private sector drive growth. It's private, we need to unlock that's what we need to do in those partnerships with this small amount of funding. I don't want to overestimate, but other levers that government has, whether it's apprenticeships, whether it's on higher education and further education, how does the DFE, and that's part of that realignment towards regional balance, to look at that. And I think that's where the partnerships also importantly provide, and then maybe the difference from labour market partnerships is provide an opportunity for that voice to be delivered back into policymakers and central economic government. So we hear all the problem, but I'm again being frank, in terms of the department's approach before, was we primarily left that to invest in Northern Ireland, to engage in community. We didn't hear those voices. And now's the opportunity. I think these partnerships is as much about giving and building trust and building real partnership. Now, it's grand me saying all that there, right? But that will be tested. And some partnerships I know already work better than others at local level.
Well, I mean, I know even just from my experience on Belfast City Council, how innovative some of the work is happening, and those links into community and some of the projects are really brilliant. Kieran, can I ask you a bit then about how the regional Invest offices sit within those council areas? If you envisage the councils kind of joining together a bit more, how you'll balance will the offices change? You're going to keep them in the same places?
So we'll be moving from a 4 operating region model to a 5 operating region model. So we're going to have a team and an office dedicated to Belfast, and a team and office dedicated to the broader eastern region. That office will be based in Ballymena, and then we have our Belfast team will remain either in headquarters or we'll get an office elsewhere in the city. We will be increasing, as I said, the headcount across that office network by 40%. In all of my travels across Northern Ireland over the last 8 months, I've been really impressed by the strength of the relationship between our regional teams in those offices and local and regional stakeholders, and the very, very strong relationship with the councils. So I see that relationship, if anything, deepening, and our efforts becoming more coordinated, and we will be a central partner in the partnerships that the councils and other local stakeholders will create in the context of this regional plan. So I think that gives me optimism for the future in terms of delivering on our regional ambitions.
And it's quite it's quite a change for Invest NI. How are your staff reacting to this, and what's the feeling within the organisation?
I think the mood is very upbeat and optimistic because our regional strategy is part of our overall new organisational strategy, and they see the priority that we're attaching to that, but also raising the overall level of the investments that we're winning. Specifically with respect to the regional agenda, there's a lot of enthusiasm within the existing regional team because they see the prospect of more people coming to work with them on this exciting agenda. They see new and fresh faces and skills coming into that team, and they also see themselves playing a more prominent role in the delivery of the overall organisation's strategy. So I would say a lot of optimism, and the mood is upbeat.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Kate. As some of my colleagues online haven't indicated, I'll maybe take the opportunity just to ask a couple of other questions, just in relation to the sub-regional employment rates within regions. So take Belfast, where Kate and I represent. On the grand scheme of things, people think Belfast lined with gold, their streets, and that every person who lives in Belfast has a job that pays more than the medium income, etc., etc. So how do we ensure that there's a focus also on those harder to reach communities within inner city Belfast who haven't quite felt the prosperity agenda of other parts of the city, or those who may work in Belfast but reside in David's constituency?
Don't disagree at all. How could you disagree if the evidence is there to show? And I come from Belfast myself and know some of the issues that directly affect individuals there, and a significant number. So the challenge for us moving forward, and the Minister met with all the party leaders 2 weeks ago. We was in Belfast City Council, the Minister.
That was an experience.
He met with all the party leaders, and he shared his thinking around the partnerships and what would the funding be used in Belfast, because the fear was Belfast not getting any because it's not regional balance. Yes. But it is. But the issue then is about this balance between flexibility. We know with the product that we know the skills attainment level are in your constituency and in other constituencies. So the challenge there is for leadership there, the partnership level, to focus, because it's not a significant amount of money for Belfast in terms of overall spend. How does it utilise that money? How does it complement labour market partnerships? I think it's what could they scale up, and I think that's the opportunity. And again, I come back, I think, like regional balance, there's a whole lot of levers in there, and I can't overemphasise city and growth in your own constituency. I think Studio Ulster and the work they're doing with the Boys Model and other schools there is fantastic about opening up opportunities on the creative industries. It's massive. Now, how could that activity be scaled? You might, traditionally, it may have been hard to find a source. If your partnership decided that was an opportunity to sweat that asset more and to provide those opportunities. I look at some of the stats out this morning, apprenticeships, about female apprenticeships in STEM. How do we, in particular areas where there's a particular problem of getting females involved in STEM apprenticeships, that's the sort of funding. So I very much see this, Philip, in the context of those partnerships making some decisions, but recognising that there's not a silver bullet here, that it's the totality of it.
And just on that inclusive economy stuff, which is really important, the Minister has stated in his document that his department will participate in the People in Place pilot scheme in North Belfast. So I just wanted to see what you believed your role would be in that.
I'll ask Keith that's been involved in that. So.
Yeah, later this month we'll be having discussions with Ashton, who are part of that pilot. Over the last 18 months or so, we've been involved in that People and Places, and my team's been in Auchnacloy was one of the pilot areas, and we're up in the Diamond and Derry Londonderry as well as one of the pilots. And our role in that, to be honest with you, was mostly listening to start with, because we had never participated in something like that before. That was traditionally DFC territory, and so it was an eye opener, shall we say. But we were also very welcomed by a lot of those groups because they never had those economic discussions. We don't sit on community planning partnerships, Invest do. And so we've started going along to those, for example, to start trying to develop our relationships there. And on these People and Places, taking this forward, this piece of work, we're trying to sort of feel our way through initially. And how can we maybe link that work into the partnerships as well? So, for example, the one in Derry Londonderry, talking to Triax, and they were discussing how do they take people that they're putting through skills programs, but how do they then take that into linking with the likes of Go Succeed, and how would someone come to that would link with some of the stuff that maybe Ambition to Grow work. And so we're just trying to maybe help them through that pathway initially. So it's early days, but it's interesting and quite honestly exciting work as well for us.
I think, Chair, if I can add it, it's indicative of the change in approach. You asked me earlier about how the department's realigned. We wouldn't have had the resource to do that before. Keith and his team have been out there engaging on that project and that cross-working group. So I think that's an example. It's just the start of the journey.
Of course.
And but it's a small step, but it's an important step.
If I could add, I think we've echoed that is one of the key differences, having DFE alongside InvestNI at an operational level in those partnerships. And some of those partnerships are kind of long evening conversations where we're kind of trying to build from the ground up, but do that in a co-creation and co-design manner has been fundamentally different to the last few years. And so that's where I think we get our confidence that moving forward, that co-production, that co-design, that co-delivery will be something that will become the norm. Now, we will learn as we go on that. We might not get it all right all at once, but the joint commitment to having policy and delivery at the table with our partners is providing both confidence and opportunity. So it's important that we keep going on that model over the long term.
And then, Kieran, just a wider issue in relation to dual market access, just while you're here. So reports in the past few weeks have shown that little sign so far of materialisation of benefits of dual market access to the Northern Ireland economy. So I just wanted to check, have you seen any interest? I know the Minister on The View last week said there had been interest, but nothing concrete at this stage. Just wondering if you've seen any examples of where dual market access has got investment here in Northern Ireland that otherwise wouldn't have come.
So there is ongoing expressions of interest by investors, but they haven't yet converted into investments on the ground. But there is increasing interest, so people want to have conversations with us about dual market access, what it means in practice, how it would work, and how companies could take advantage of it. So those conversations are ongoing, and I do believe they will convert into investments in due course. The Minister is leading a trade mission to Germany later this month, where the specific focus is dual market access, and we have worked with our colleagues in the department to develop a tailored value proposition related to the dual market access opportunity. And this will be an opportunity for us to stress test that with German investors. So we're learning all the time about how investors perceive the dual market access opportunity, and I look forward to coming back to the committee in due course to advise you of the investments that have materialised as a consequence of that.
Excellent. Well, on that positive note, can I thank you on behalf of the committee for all the work that you've done. I know since the restoration of the Assembly and Executive, your department's been extremely busy, but it's important work that you're all engaged in and invest. So from a committee perspective, we'll continue to support the great work that you do. So thank you all very much for your
Chair,
time.
thank you, members.
Okay, colleagues, I just need to firstly summarise a couple of actions. Firstly, from the previous presentation from Dr. Jordan. So Padraig, I know he's not on the, or he might not be able to hear us, but Padraig had asked just for some information in relation to, oh, there you are, sir. Some information in relation to the 4-day working week and also remote working. So if we can just follow up with Dr. Jordan on that to make sure that Padraig and the committee's furnished with that. There was something that I wanted to ask.
Sorry, Chairperson. You'd asked about productivity benchmarking
Yes.
So the department is, Dr. Jordan indicated, there's a piece about data.
Yes.
And how do you benchmark
Be
productivity?
keen to see how the department are progressing with getting that data, because obviously in the absence of that, that would be difficult to get. Turning then to that presentation on sub-regional economic plan. I know it's not included in this document, but in the minister's oral statement, he made reference just in relation to the department will be taking over the funding of Derry City Airport, which will be positive news for many of the members on the committee. So I just think it'll be useful though to get officials along next week to try and explain what that means.
Yeah, Chair, it is welcome news from at the minute we don't know the detail. I think it would be unfair to assume that the council will have no obligations, because ultimately there are management issues, and as you have said, the department may not have the expertise to do that. I think the challenge with the airport every year has been that because there are so many different funders, that the Department for Economy are going to assume the position of trying to coordinate that.
Yeah.
So, but you're right, I think the more detail we can get, the better.
Everyone's content with that? Okay, was there anything else on the back of the sub-regional economic plan?
Not specifically on
Yeah.
the plan, but it complements it. The Towns Fund, which actually in terms of value is very significant to not only my constituency but to Causeway Coast and Glens. There's been no clarification from the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government whether or not that will go ahead. Could we maybe write to Angela Rayner, who's the Minister for that department, and ask her for an update?
And do Chairperson,
So that's
just
both Coleraine and Derry London.
just to advise members, well, it's a new government now, let's see what happens, but previous experience
You don't
in
get a
terms of,
response.
we got 0 previously, let's see what happens. Is the committee also content, Chairperson, to write to the department, our department, about the regional property programme, just seeking the details, the priorities and the budget? And if you also, you want an update from the department on the formula that's going to be used to allocate the money to the councils, I'm guessing. And would you like further information on dual market access and what the progress is in terms of realising?
Maybe let's wait to see how they get on with their
the Germans?
visit to Germany and Europe. And I know Kieran will come back and hopefully brief us on that.
Is that a rest
Members all content?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's move to the next item then, members, which is item number 8, delegated legislation, student fees amendment. Refer members to page 159 of the clerk's covering note that the department indicates that it may lay a statutory rule. The proposed rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure and would come into operation on the 6th of April 2025. The proposed rule will, after the Education Student Support No. 2 Regulation Northern Ireland 2009, in line with changes to the tax rules for non-UK domiciled individuals. This will end from April 25 and will be replaced by a system based on tax residence. Associated references to UK non-domiciled status will be removed from UK tax legislation. To align with this, technical amendments to the student support regulations are required to remove references to non-domiciled tax status. Are members content with this, or do they have any questions at this stage? Members are content for the department to make the rule. Are we agreed on that?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Item 9 then, delegated legislation, student fees amendment number 2. Again, refer you to the clerk's covering note at page 163. The department indicates that it is to lay a statutory rule, the Student Fees Amounts Amendment Regulation 2024. The proposed rule would be subject to negative resolution procedure and would come into operation for the 25-26 academic year. Since 2010-11, tuition fees levels for eligible students studying at higher educational institutions have increased in line with inflation on an annual basis. It is proposed that an increase of 2.3% is applied to the basic and higher fees amount for academic year 25-26. This would see the maximum amount of tuition fee level increase from £4,750 to £4,855 in the 25-26 academic year. Members will recall that the index to be used for annual operating of fees is the retail price index excluding mortgage repayments. Members also recall the previous increase was 0.9% last year. The department advised that the equality of opportunity screening exercise has been carried out in respect of these draft regulations and has found that the operational technical changes in this amendment do not negatively impact any section 75 categories. Members have any questions or concerns? Padraig?
Yeah, no, sort of separate issue, Chair. So if you want to do the vote on that, I'll come back on after it.
Okay, are members content then that we, that the department lay this rule? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Chair, just to advise, Mr. Buckley has been booted out by Zoom. We could wait for him to rejoin, or we could continue. I know he's just texting me saying that he's actually been kicked out. So, do you want? It's up to you, Chair. We can take our ease for a couple of minutes while he reboots, or oh, there you go. He's dropped out. Sorry, members. It just would be practice to stop for a little bit until we get him back. So sorry about that. I just want
Is
to
he
take
trying to get back in?
He is trying very hard to get back in. So if we do you want to push the button just for a second, and we'll
take a short recess.
If that's okay. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No,
it's just this technology has let us down.
Committee Room 30. Sound. 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 Committee Room 30. Sound.
8 or 9, which was in relation to student amendments.
No, that's
Okay.
I'm fine, Chair.
Okay. Okay, members, we'll restart then at item 10, which is delegated legislation, statutory rule, RHI tariffs, and refer members to page 167 of their packs in the clerk's covering note. The department has laid a draft statutory rule, SR 2024-000, the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme Amendment Regulations, Northern Ireland 2024. The department provided oral and written evidence on the proposed statutory rule on the 11th and 25th of September. The Renewable Heat Association also provided evidence to this committee on the 25th of September. This rule is to come into effect on the 1st of November 2024, will be subject to draft affirmative procedures, and therefore will be debated up the plenary before this date. The clerk's covering note summarises the information obtained from the department. Do members have any questions in relation to this one? No? Okay, well then, could I put that the Committee for the Economy has considered SR 2024-000, the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme Amendment Regulation, Northern Ireland, and subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules recommends that it is affirmed by the Assembly. Are members agreed? Agreed? Agreed. Okay. Then move to item 11, members, which is correspondence. Page 177 of our meeting packs. Members are asked to note a departmental response indicating that the Social Enterprise Action Plan is being developed by the Social Enterprise Co-Design Group with a view to publication in October. Members content to note.
Yep.
Thank you. Items 3, page 185. Members are asked to note a departmental response indicating that the Apprenticeship Action Plan is in development with costs of around £40 million. Members content to note.
Yep.
Item 4. Members are asked to note information on the new appointees to the Northern Ireland Tourism Board. DFE is to brief on the 10-year tourism strategy in November 2024. Are members content to note?
Yep.
Thank you. Item 5 at page 201, members are asked to consider a response to committee queries in respect of the use of less than 5 megawatt distributed renewable assets. The department is still considering the minimum size of renewable that will be included in the new scheme. So David, obviously this is an important issue that you have raised, and I know that the feeling is shared by other members. So I just think that it is important that the department is aware of the importance of this issue, so we will keep it under watch and brief.
Yeah, absolutely. This is key for most stuff smaller rather than
exactly.
bigger stuff. Yeah.
100%. Item 6 then, members, page 233. Members are asked to note or propose consultation on support for low carbon heating in residential buildings. The consultation will launch this month. Members content to note pending a briefing from the department.
Yep.
Thank you. Item 7, members are asked to consider response to committee queries in respect of HE quality research capital allocations by universities. DFE indicates that it doesn't hold this information by campus. Are members content we contact the universities then directly?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 8 at page 241, members are asked to note departmental response to committee queries in respect of the enhanced investment zone. So still no further on at this stage in terms of clarity from UKG. Are members content to note at this stage? Thank you. Item 9, page 245, members are asked to note correspondence to the committee queries in respect of post-19 cent transformation proposals. Are we content to note? Thank you. Item 10, page 247, members are asked to note correspondence relating to the sub-regional economic plan. Members content to note.
Yep.
Item 11, members are asked to note response in relation to Harland Wolff. Happy to note, members.
Yep.
Thank you. Item 12, page 251, members are asked to note a copy of the Digital Skills Action Plan provided by the Northern Ireland Skills Council. Members content to note. Sorry, that's incorrect. Are members content to note and forward this to the Committee for the Education, and we'll have a further briefing from DFE on technology clusters. Members content with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 13, page 277, members are asked to note a response from DE on the previous DARD Rural Childcare Programme. Our committee happy to forward this to the Northern Ireland Childminders Association. Thank you. Item 14 is members are asked to consider correspondence from the Committee for Finance on insurance issues. Is the committee content to forward previous related correspondence from the FCA to the Competition and Markets Authority?
Yep.
Thank you.
Get her in trouble here. Just
Item 15, members are asked to note correspondence from the LRA in relation to Hospitality Ulster being added to their forum. The forum is indicating that they've recently reconvened membership and is under consideration. Can members content we forward that to Hospitality Ulster?
Yeah.
Item 16 again is for noting members from the FCA. Are you content?
Yeah.
Thank you. Item 17 is a meeting request from NUSUSI that I meet with them. Are members content I do that on behalf of the committee?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Members are asked to consider an invitation to the Chair and Deputy Chairperson to the launch of the Centre of Public Policy and Administration on the Friday the 25th of October 2024. Members content to note?
Yep.
Thank you. Members are asked to note a request to meet the committee from Work Plus. So Work Plus is an organisation that I recently met focused on on the issue of apprenticeships and almost a matchmaking exercise of apprenticeships with apprentices, and the point eloquently made by Mr. Buckley a few weeks ago that currently it seems to be those who you know rather than is the only way to get an apprenticeship. So I think the work that they're doing in terms of trying to widen the availability of apprenticeships would be important for the committee to hear from, so we content that we invite them along.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Do we have any issues you want to raise in the forward work plan?
I think Patrick wants to.
Oh, Patrick, sorry, yes, sir.
It's not letting him unmute.
Unmute.
Here we
Oh,
go.
there you go.
You're on.
And then he's away. Oh, there, back.
Am I on now yet?
Yes, sir.
Great. No, thanks for that and for running through it so quickly, Chair. But it's just the student loan stuff, and that's why I wanted to do it after the vote, because I just think we need to invite them back in. Like, I'm sure other people are the same, but during the summer, I have had so many constituents who are coming in who have either started a degree previously or have done a degree previously. We've heard today one of the key things in productivity is about lifelong learning. Yet, if you're somebody who's done a degree or who's trying to go on to do a master's, PhD, etc., you're not able to get proper funding for that adequately supports you. And to me, that's a key avenue in this, is that we're not able to upskill people as they want, as they desire, and as they see fit for industry as well. So I think there's a conversation around that in terms of inviting them back in, but also around the interest rates, which are just crippling. And I appreciate this is a reserved matter, but I do think that as a committee, we need to exercise our scrutiny powers to make sure that we're actually making sure that this is accounted for, that the people are heard, because this is an issue that we're certainly hearing very, very substantively in our constituency, and I'm sure others are the same. So I would be proposing that we invite student finance back in on those two specific issues, because otherwise it becomes a broad, rambling debate on everything. I think if we bring them on two specific issues that really need answered for constituents.
So, Chairperson, it's to invite the department. Sorry, is that what you're saying? Sorry, who are we inviting?
No, I'm saying they bring in the student loan company.
Student loan company, and to ask them about undergraduate or.
So they ask for, well, the lifelong learning piece. So it's actually around access to courses continuously. So they ask about whether people can get in for postgraduate, master's courses, all that sort of stuff. People are finding it difficult when they've gone from one course to either try and re-enter or to try and continue in education. And then the other pieces around the interest rates as well. So I think those two specific issues are the best.
Okay. If that agree, Chairperson?
I do agree with that. I suppose just in terms of clarity, in terms of the role of the department, this is an issue that raised itself with the graduate entry medical school. Obviously they're entering and they have been graduates. They weren't eligible for loans. However, the Minister for the Economy had announced 2 weeks ago that he would enable them to be able to go and do that. So I suppose in terms of the role for the Minister and for the department, we need to clarify what their role is. Ultimately, these are UK government loans, through the student loan company. So it's just to get that clarification. But obviously, if it works for the graduate entry medical school, then I don't see why we should be prohibiting other people who want to have lifelong learning opportunities as well.
There's a consultation, as members are aware, by the department on the postgraduate award scheme, so that would cover postgraduate awards. But it sounds like we're writing to the department. We're asking the specific question about GEMS and the access of those students to student loans, which
Additional
they
support,
weren't. Yeah, exactly where they were. And then further to that, you want a briefing from the student loan company. Okay, then maybe we'll try and align that maybe with the postgraduate award scheme. It's going on a bit. We're not going to hear from them until December, so that's a bit far away. So you want to hear about that sooner. Sensing? Yes, okay, that's what I'll do then. Okay, if that's agreed, Chairperson.
Okay. Forward work programme?
Well, that was it. We'll just add that to the forward work programme. It's sorry about this, members. It's a really heavy week next week. This was not the intention, but the department wanted to come next week, not this week, to talk about their programme for government, business plan, etc. So we've got a lot on. Sorry about that. And Invest and I will be back again on the 16th. I didn't expect them to appear today at all. I didn't know that until Friday afternoon, given that they're coming on the 16th anyway to talk about the action plan update and all that good stuff. So
next week we have briefing on the business plan 3-year forward look.
Yes, and we also have Professor David Rooney, who's the final of the Critical Friends, telling us about net zero stuff, and then the Forum for Better Housing wanted to talk about green skills and housing development. So there's all good stuff in there, but it's heavy going. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Mr. Crawford doesn't care.
Members, are there any other relevant business for the committee? If not, then the committee will adjourn, and we'll see you all next week. With the exception of Colin, and thank you for your brief but important service to her.
Thanks, members. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound.